The empty seat beside Aria Zimmer at the funeral seemed like the final insult from the universe. Not only had she lost her mentor, Professor Eleanor Wallace, but now she was sitting alone while everyone else huddled together in their shared grief. The autumn rain pelted against the tent over the burial site, creating a rhythmic backdrop to the minister's solemn words. Aria clutched her program tightly, the paper wrinkling beneath her trembling fingers, when someone slid quietly into the empty chair beside her. She didn't look up immediately, grateful for the simple human presence in her moment of isolation. It wasn't until the stranger offered her a pristine white handkerchief that she turned to face him. His profile was striking strong jaw, dark brows pulled together in respectful solemnity, and eyes that somehow matched the steel-gray sky overhead. "Thank you," she whispered, accepting the handkerchief with hesitation. He nodded once, returning his attention to the service without a word. There was something oddly comforting about sitting beside this silent stranger, as they both listened to stories about Professor Wallace's remarkable life. Eleanor had been more than just a professor to Aria. She'd been a guiding light, the woman who'd encouraged Aria to pursue her dreams of becoming a literary curator despite her humble background. Now she was gone, and Aria felt utterly adrift. When the service concluded, people began rising from their seats, exchanging quiet condolences. Aria remained seated, not quite ready to join the mingling crowd, surprised when the man beside her stayed as well. "Did you know her well?" he finally asked, his voice deeper than she'd expected. Aria nodded, dabbing at her eyes with his handkerchief. "She changed my life. Mine too." His response was simple but weighted with meaning. Before Aria could ask how he knew Eleanor, another man approached them, leaning down to whisper something in her companion's ear. The stranger nodded, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features before he turned back to her. "I'm sorry I have to go. Business doesn't respect grief, unfortunately." He hesitated, then added, "I'm Xander Valentine." The name registered somewhere in the back of her mind, but her thoughts were too clouded with grief to place it. Aria Zimmer. It was. "Peaceful sitting with you, Aria." He rose to his feet, buttoning his impeccably tailored suit jacket. "I hope you find some comfort in knowing how many lives she touched." With that, he walked away, his tall figure moving through the dispersing mourners with purpose. It wasn't until he climbed into a sleek black car complete with a driver that Aria realized she still had his handkerchief. She tucked it into her purse, making a mental note to somehow return it, though she had no idea how to find him again. 3 days later, Aria was back at work in the university library's special collections department, trying to lose herself in the familiar comfort of rare books. She was carefully examining a first edition when her supervisor appeared at her desk. "Aria, there's someone asking for you at the front desk." Expecting a student needing research assistance, she was stunned to find Xander Valentine standing in the library's grand entrance hall. Today, his suit was charcoal gray instead of funeral black, but he looked no less imposing against the library's ornate architecture. "Mr. Valentine," she said, surprised to find her voice steady. "How did you know where to find me? Eleanor mentioned you often." His eyes moved past her to take in the library's soaring ceilings and wall-to-wall books. "She was quite proud of the work you do here." Aria felt a pang at the mention of her mentor. "She never mentioned you." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I imagine not. Our relationship was complicated." Before she could question what that meant, he continued, "I wondered if you might have time for coffee. There's something I'd like to discuss with you regarding Eleanor's legacy." Curiosity overrode her hesitation. "I have a lunch break in an hour." "Perfect. I'll wait." True to his word, Xander was still there when she emerged an hour later, sitting in one of the library's reading chairs with a leather-bound book open in his hands. He closed it carefully when he saw her approaching. "The Portrait of a Lady," Aria noted. "Are you a Henry James fan?" "Eleanor gave me this copy when I was 19. He returned the book to the shelf. "She said it would teach me something about the choices we make and why we make them." They walked to a small cafe across from campus, the autumn air crisp between them. Once seated with steaming cups before them, Xander seemed to be carefully choosing his words. "Eleanor left something for you in her will," he finally said. Aria nearly spilled her coffee. "For me, but I'm not family. Neither am I, technically, but Eleanor considered us both important." He reached into his suit jacket and produced a sealed envelope. "This is from her attorney. There will be a formal reading of the will next week, but he thought you might want some time to consider this particular bequest beforehand." Aria accepted the envelope with trembling hands. "I don't understand. Why would you be the one to deliver this?" Xander's expression was unreadable. "I'm the executor of her estate. But how did you know her?" The question had been burning in her mind since the funeral. He took a careful sip of his coffee before answering. "She was my father's college professor decades ago. When he died, she reached out to me. I was just an angry teenager then. She became a mentor to me as well, helped me navigate some difficult years." Aria opened the envelope, scanning the formal legal language until she reached the part that made her heart stop. "This can't be right." "It's right," Xander confirmed. "She's leaving you her cottage in Maine along with the rare book collection inside it. But that must be worth several million." Yes, Eleanor was quite the collector. Aria set the letter down, feeling lightheaded. "I can't accept this. It should go to her family. You were her family in all the ways that mattered to her." His gray eyes held hers, "just as I was." They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of Eleanor's final gift settling between them. Finally, Aria spoke again. "What did she leave you?" A shadow passed over his face. "Her shares in Valentine Industries." The pieces suddenly clicked into place: the expensive suit, the driver, the sense of authority that seemed to surround him. "Valentine Industries. You're that Valentine, the tech billionaire," he grimaced slightly. "I prefer Xander, especially from people who knew Eleanor. I had no idea she had connections to your company. She was one of our earliest investors. My father met her at Princeton, and when he started the company, she believed in him enough to invest a significant portion of her inheritance." His fingers tapped against the ceramic mug. "When he died, she stepped in as a silent partner, guiding me until I was ready to take over." Aria was struggling to reconcile this new information with the literature professor she had known. She never said a word about any of this. Eleanor compartmentalized her life. "I think it helped her maintain perspective." He leaned forward slightly. "Which brings me to the second reason I wanted to meet with you. There's more. The cottage in Maine, it needs a proper caretaker, someone who understands the value of what's inside it. I'm hoping you'll consider actually living there, at least part of the time, rather than selling it." Aria's mind raced with possibilities. The idea of living surrounded by rare books in a coastal Maine cottage was almost too perfect to imagine. "I'd have to leave my job here." "Actually, I've been discussing an arrangement with the university. They're quite interested in having access to Eleanor's collection for research purposes. You could maintain your position as curator, just with a different collection." She narrowed her eyes. "You've been planning this." "Laying groundwork," he corrected. "The decision is entirely yours." As they left the cafe, Aria was deep in thought. Xander walked beside her in companionable silence, matching his long stride to hers. "Would you like to see the cottage?" he asked suddenly. "I'm flying up there tomorrow to check on some things. You could come along, get a feel for the place before making any decisions." The sensible part of Aria knew she should decline. She barely knew this man, billionaire or not. But something about the way grief had connected them at the funeral, the shared understanding of what Eleanor had meant to them both, made her nod. "Yes, I think I would." The following morning found Aria boarding Xander's private jet, feeling wildly out of place with her worn leather satchel and practical clothes. Xander, however, seemed perfectly at ease in jeans and a cashmere sweater, his usual formal attire abandoned for the trip. "I come up here whenever I need to think," he explained as they flew over the New England coastline. Eleanor used to joke that she kept the cottage as a billionaire rehab center, a place to remember what's actually important. The cottage turned out to be a deceptively simple-looking structure perched on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic. Inside, however, it expanded into a carefully designed space where nearly every wall housed floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. Aria moved through the rooms in quiet awe, occasionally pulling volumes from shelves with reverent hands. "This first edition Austen, I've only seen photos of it." Xander watched her from the doorway, something softening in his expression. "This is why she chose you. The way you look at those books, it's exactly how she used to look at them." They spent the day exploring the cottage and its grounds. Xander showed her the hidden reading nooks Eleanor had created, the garden where she grew herbs for tea, and finally, as sunset approached, led her to a path that wound down to a small, private beach. "She used to say the sound of waves turning pages was the perfect soundtrack for reading," he said, hands in his pockets as they walked along the shore. "You miss her a lot," Aria observed, "more than I expected to." He bent to pick up a smooth stone, turning it over in his hands. "She was the one constant in my life for almost 20 years. How did she die? No one at the university really knew. Heart failure. It was quick, at least." He skipped the stone across the water. "I was in Tokyo when it happened, didn't even get to say goodbye." Aria touched his arm gently. "I'm sorry." They stood watching the waves until the chill drove them back to the cottage, where Xander built a fire in the stone hearth. Over a simple dinner of pasta and wine that they prepared together in the cozy kitchen, Aria found herself telling him about her childhood in a small Pennsylvania town, how Eleanor had recognized her passion for literature and helped her secure scholarships for graduate school. "What about you?" she asked as they settled on the sofa with their wine. "Was it always expected that you'd take over Valentine Industries?" His laugh held little humor. "Expected, demanded, assumed, take your pick. My father built the company from nothing." The idea that his only son might want something different was inconceivable. "And did you want something different?" Xander was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "I wanted to write, fiction specifically." He glanced at her, a self-deprecating smile on his lips. "Ridiculous, right? The billionaire who dreams of being a struggling novelist. Not ridiculous at all. What stopped you? Reality. Responsibility. My father died when I was 18, and there was a company with thousands of employees depending on me." He swirled the wine in his glass. "Eleanor was the only one who encouraged the writing, said I could do both." "Did you do both?" He shook his head. "I have a drawer full of unfinished manuscripts, never enough time." Aria leaned back, studying him. "For someone with seemingly unlimited resources, you talk about time like it's the one thing you can't afford. Perceptive." He raised his glass in a mock toast. "Time is the great equalizer. No matter how much money you have, you still only get 24 hours a day." The conversation flowed easily between them late into the night. When Aria finally yawned, Xander showed her to the master bedroom. "You take this one," he insisted. "I always use the guest room when I'm here." The next morning, Aria woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of typing. Following the noise, she found Xander at an antique desk in Eleanor's study, fingers moving rapidly over a laptop keyboard. He looked up when she entered, quickly closing the computer. "Sorry, inspiration struck. One of those unfinished manuscripts, maybe." He stood, stretching. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have since she died," Aria admitted. They spent another day at the cottage, with Xander showing her the systems, explaining how the property was maintained. By the time they flew back to the city that evening, Aria had made her decision. "I want to do it," she told him as the jet began its descent. "I want to live in the cottage, catalog the collection properly, make it available to researchers." The smile that broke across his face transformed his features entirely. Eleanor would be thrilled. Over the next few weeks, Xander helped Aria navigate the legal aspects of her inheritance and the transition to her new role. They spoke nearly every day, their conversations extending far beyond the practicalities of her moved to discussions of literature, philosophy, and increasingly, their personal lives. By the time Aria officially moved into the cottage in early December, snow was blanketing the Maine coastline, transforming the property into something from a fairy tale. Xander arrived the day after she did, ostensibly to help her settle in, but Aria suspected he simply wanted to be there. "I had groceries delivered," he said, carrying bags into the kitchen, "and the caretaker stocked firewood for the winter." "You didn't have to do all this," Aria protested, though she was touched by his thoughtfulness. "Consider it selfish." "I'm planning to visit often, assuming that's okay with you." Their eyes met across the kitchen, and something shifted in the air between them. "Very okay," she said softly. That evening, as they sat before the fire with books open in their laps, Xander looked up suddenly. "Would you read something I wrote? No one else has ever seen it." Aria set aside her book. "I'd be honored." He retrieved his laptop, hesitating before handing it to her. "It's rough." The document was titled simply, "The Inheritance." And as Aria began reading, she realized with a jolt that it was about a young man whose life is changed by an unexpected mentor. The prose was raw but compelling, filled with emotional honesty that made her heart ache. "Xander, this is beautiful," she said when she finished the first chapter. "You should absolutely finish it." He was watching her face intently. "You mean that?" "I do. You have real talent." Something unlocked in him, then a tension she hadn't fully recognized until it was gone. They stayed up late into the night discussing his story, with Aria offering suggestions and encouragement. When they finally said goodnight, Xander paused at his bedroom door. "Thank you," he said simply, "for seeing something worth pursuing." The winter passed in a pattern they both embraced without discussing. Xander would spend weeks running his company, then escape to the cottage for days at a time. Aria divided her efforts between cataloging Eleanor's collection and establishing connections with universities interested in research access. They fell into an easy rhythm during his visits, working separately during the day, Aria with her books and Xander alternating between corporate responsibilities and his growing manuscript. Evenings were spent cooking together, talking for hours, or sitting in comfortable silence by the fire. It was during a fierce February blizzard, with the wind howling outside and snow piling against the windows, that everything changed. The power had gone out, leaving them dependent on the fireplace for warmth and light. They had moved their pillows and blankets to the living room, creating a nest of sorts before the hearth. "I finished it," Xander said, passing his laptop to her. "The manuscript." Aria sat up straighter, genuinely excited. "The whole thing." He nodded, a mixture of pride and vulnerability on his face. "I've never completed anything before." She rayed through the night, occasionally looking up to find him watching her, his expression unguarded in the firelight. When she finally reached the last page, tears were streaming down her face. "This is who you are," she whispered. "This voice, it's the real you." He moved closer, reaching out to brush a tear from her cheek. "I couldn't have finished it without you." "That's not true. You just needed the right space to create." "No, Aria." His hand lingered against her skin. "I needed you." The kiss that followed felt like an inevitability, as if they had been moving toward this moment since that first shared silence at the funeral. His arms wrapped around her with a tenderness that belied his strength, and Aria felt something long dormant within her finally awakening. When they pulled apart, Xander rested his forehead against hers. "I've been falling in love with you since that day in the cemetery," he confessed. "Is that terrible, finding something so beautiful in such a sad place?" Aria shook her head, her hands still on his shoulders. "Eleanor would probably say it's perfect. Finding connection in grief isn't that what helps us heal?" As winter melted into spring, their relationship deepened. Xander began restructuring his company to allow him more time at the cottage, and Aria established herself as the curator of what was now being called the Wallace Collection. They still maintained separate spaces. Xander kept his apartment in the city, but they were together more often than not. One evening in early May, as they walked along the beach at sunset, Xander seemed unusually quiet. "What is it?" Aria finally asked. "You've been distracted all day." He stopped walking, turning to face the ocean. "I received an offer from a publisher today for the book." "Xander." "That's incredible." She threw her arms around him. "Why didn't you tell me right away?" "Because I'm terrified," he admitted. "Publishing means people will read it, judge me, and they'll love it just as I do." He looked down at her, his expression serious. "I'm considering stepping back from Valentine Industries. Not completely, I still have responsibilities, but I've been training a COO who could take over the day-to-day operations. To focus on writing, to focus on what matters." He took her hands in his. "This past year has shown me what I really want. Not the company, not the money, those were always my father's dreams. I want quiet mornings with coffee and a keyboard, evenings discussing books with you, weekends walking this beach." Aria felt tears threatening. "Sounds perfect to me." "There's just one thing missing." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "This was Eleanor's. Her attorney gave it to me after the funeral, said she wanted you to have it, but only when the time was right." Inside the box was a vintage emerald ring, elegant in its simplicity. "She knew," Aria whispered. "She always saw more than she let on." Xander took the ring from the box, his hand steady despite the emotion in his voice. "I love you, Aria. I think maybe I started loving you in that moment of shared grief before we'd even spoken. Will you marry me?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. 1,000 times yes. They were married in the garden behind the cottage that summer, with a small gathering of friends witnessing their vows. Eleanor's presence was felt in every detail, from the flowers that had once grown in her garden to the first edition poetry collection they used for their readings. Xander's novel was published that fall to critical acclaim, though he published under a pen name, preferring to keep his writing life separate from his public identity as a business leader. Aria continued to expand access to Eleanor's collection, establishing a scholarship program for promising literature students. On the anniversary of Eleanor's death, they placed flowers on her grave together. The cemetery was quiet, the same autumn chill in the air as the day they'd met. "Do you think she knew what would happen when she seated us together?" Aria asked, her hand in his. Xander smiled, the expression reaching all the way to his eyes, something that happened far more frequently now. "Eleanor never left anything to chance. She probably had our whole lives mapped out. I wish she could have been here to see it. In all the ways that matter, she is." He looked at the simple headstone, then back to Aria. "She gave us both the greatest gift, the courage to become who we were meant to be." As they walked away hand in hand, the silence between them was no longer filled with grief, but with a profound gratitude for the woman who had brought them together, and the love that had grown from that first shared moment of quiet understanding. 5 years later, they brought their 3-year-old daughter, Eleanor Rose Valentine, to the cottage for her first summer by the sea. As Aria watched her husband chasing their giggling child along the shoreline, she thought about how a single moment sitting beside a stranger at a funeral had changed the entire course of her life. That evening, as they tucked their daughter into bed in what had once been Professor Wallace's study, now transformed into a magical child's bedroom with miniature bookshelves already filling with stories, Xander read from a special edition of his book. "Is this story about you and Mommy?" Little Eleanor asked sleepily. "It's about finding light even in the darkest moments," Xander answered, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "And how sometimes the people who leave us give us the greatest gifts by bringing new people into our lives." Later, sitting on the porch overlooking the moonlit ocean, Aria leaned her head against Xander's shoulder. "I still can't believe how lucky we are." "Not luck," he corrected gently. "Recognition. We recognized each other's souls that day, even in our grief, or perhaps because of it." Aria nodded, understanding completely. In the moment they had sat together in silence, something profound had passed between them, a connection that had only strengthened with time. From shared grief had come shared joy, and in the space between heartbeats, they had found their way home to each other.